Have you watched any of my other like interviews at all?
No, unfortunately. I've
It,
seen you. I think I watched a few like very like brief clips. I'm like, okay, like in the vibe, but I haven't watched like a full interview.
it's there. None of them are the same, and it's not like I have a set of questions for you or anything like that. It's more in unless I'm like limited for time. But really, it's like I just want to get the rundown of. Usually, if I talk to somebody, there's something specific or unique about you in comics. Um, that's it's not just like, oh, most people do the same thing. They're a creator, either an artist or a writer, but everyone does something a little bit different in this field. And you, the angle I wanted to bring you on is because I am not exactly sure what ASAP Imagination is, how it's separate from gig, uh, where you play a role in it, what all titles you release, how you bring on submissions, and like kind of the whole thing about it. Like, what is it? And because from my understanding, you are a creator of your own, but you play a role in this business, which is worldwide. And I've come to know the name ASAP Imagination because a few creators I've had on, I can't remember who they were published with or what they were doing, but they told me they're like, we do have our books over in the UK through a third party publisher called ASAP Imagination.
Yeah.
Um, and and then whenever I downloaded that gig report, I realized like, oh yeah, they're all a part of this. So I'm just like, and there's no one else I've really found that has collectively like brought together a group of independent creators of not just the writers and artists, but the editors, even reviewers and like commentators and podcasts, and put it all into sort of like a report for people to be either read or download or be a part of. And so that's what intrigued me. So now I just leave
Yeah.
it to you to be like, fill me in on what you want to explain about you and all of that. Fill me in on the gaps.
Yeah. I feel like, well, that's like a big thing to to
Yeah,
tackle right off the top.
that's my problem is
Um,
I don't make it specific enough. I just
fair
say
enough.
go.
So I'll try and like start with me and then go to ASAP and Hades and then try and narrow it down, I guess.
Perfect.
So I was a writer first. Um, I was trying to write novels, and then I ended up meeting Hades, who was also more of a prose writer, but was trying to get into comics. So he's the owner of ASAP Imagination, but at the time that didn't exist. So he was kind of doing the traditional, like writing a script, working with an artist, and they're submitting it to the more standard publishers. Hearing crickets, so um, they decided to do their own thing. And then Hades is, or the artist decided he didn't want to be a part of it, but Hades is like, I still want to do this. And then his 9 to 5 ended, and COVID happened, and it was kind of just like that opportune moment where he's just like, you know what, I'm going for it. So at the time I'd met him, but I was kind of like, I met him when I was pregnant, and then like once this all started happening, I by then I'd had my kid, and I was like just on the sidelines, kind of cheering him on and trying to write, but not being super successful at it as like a new mom, just because it was hectic and overwhelming and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that
I
stuff.
get you there.
Yeah. Kids are an experience that you are not prepared for, regardless of how much you try to prepare.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, I still try to write because it was like important to me to kind of have something that was my own and fill that creative bucket. That because yeah, just something that I could still call my own and set aside for me. Um, so when we first met, we'd been talked about doing this project together that was essentially a whole bunch of short stories centered around one event. And in his comic book universe, already created all these characters, even though he was working on one title, but it all centered around this one catastrophic event in an alternate London. And he was like, well, do you want to use this to do it? And it's kind of like, well, I'm like overwhelmed, like stressed. I was like, writing isn't working, but he's a very persuasive guy. So by the end of, we got off the phone, or we were almost off the phone, and I was like, I have my first idea for the first story. So like, I was already like obviously in. And it was supposed to be a one-off, where it's just like, this was just something to focus on. We set a release date. We each wrote 8 stories. And this is actually like we have a Kickstarter right now, and this is kind of the Kickstarter is a graphic novel of this original anthology that we wrote. Because it was in prose, we each wrote 8 stories. So it's a combination of 16 stories of just regular people experiencing this like paranormal, awful event with like nightmares and terrors and monsters. And each is their own story. And as you read them, you get kind of like a more complete perspective of what happened. Um, so and it's I don't have a copy of it. I always have this like it's a flip book. So it's like 8 stories. You read 8 stories, and it's basically a countdown to the event. And then the event happens, you flip it over, and then there's like the other 8 stories, and they kind of like
Oh,
spawn
whoa.
from
It's
there.
like backwards, so you can read it from
Yeah, so
both
half the book
ends.
is upside down, and if you're like reading
Whoa.
it out in public, the people sitting on this side of you are like, you're like, are you reading that book upside down?
Now
Are
that's
you sure?
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was kind of like a fun idea, and it's like this work of art. And we're gonna publish it through Amazon, and Amazon like gave us a proof. But then when we press publish, it didn't go past their quality control. And you're like, well, Huff, the book is upside down. And we're like, well, we know that. And they're like, we can't publish it. And that was kind of the start of like
Uh,
diving hard into indie, where it's just like, well, the big publisher, like one of the, I think that is it the biggest publisher, I guess now, but probably.
when it comes to
Um,
volume, probably.
yeah, and reach and market and all that stuff. Like Amazon's a behemoth, obviously.
Hmm.
But yeah, they just like wouldn't do what we wanted to. So we decided to like go hard into our own. So we started selling this stuff on our own site, and we did way back when we did a Kickstarter for that and our first comic book, which was Messiah. That was kind of cool. It's like about a hero who basically can absorb people's injuries, but he can't heal himself. So he like takes on their injuries. So it's kind of that whole like, how much do you want to help people kind of thing. So
Oh,
he's always
man.
like bandaged and battered and stuff because he's obviously helping people
That
when maybe
reminds me
he
of a
shouldn't
real
be.
life story of there was a guy, I think his name was Albert Price or something Price, and he was known for being incredibly altruistic and sort of became wealthy and gave all his money away. And there's a book about it called The Price of Altruism, because
Yeah,
the more he gave his money away, he also tried to help these people with their lives, but they just they eventually they killed him. It's a sad story.
really.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he committed suicide in basically a
Oh
homeless
man.
shelter. But it's a really insane story because this is like one of the smartest people in the world. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know why. The idea of like you're saying, like you're
No,
just
no,
giving away so
yeah.
much, but it just tears you down. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, I
like
know that's
they're
like that's a common thing with like lottery winners, right? Like people win like millions of dollars and they end up like bankrupt or murdered or like suicide's
yeah,
common as well, just because it's like people just want so much of you and expect so much, and like it's hard to like it's a lot of money
yeah,
to
yeah,
deal
and
with.
no one's really
Like,
prepared for it, and everyone, yeah, that's a really interesting, concept. That's so good idea with
yeah.
that book.
Yeah. So it's like, and it's a cool book, and it was my first exposure to comics because they're not like well like hero comics, I suppose. Like when I was little, I was like Calvin and Hobbes, Garfield, Farside, like Archies, those kinds of
Yeah, I
things.
was the same way as deep as I'm into comics now. Whenever I was a kid, that was the stuff I was into was Archie, The Simpsons, the actual like
Yeah,
strip cartoons, Calvin and Hobbes, things like that. It wasn't big
yeah,
Marvel and DC like most people are.
yeah. So that was kind of like, and also like I was also into like the TV shows was my like Ninja Turtles and Spider-Man. Like that
Yeah.
was my kind of like exposure to that kind of world, but I wasn't reading like the physical comics. So then when I met Hades, like I have like an attention to detail, and I wasn't like officially an editor or anything, but I was reading his comic scripts and giving him feedback. So I had like a bit of exposure there, and obviously releasing our book at the same time as his first comic, kind of obviously is like rooting for that and did a proofread and stuff. But yeah, I wasn't really like planning on getting into comics. And then this anthology that we wrote together is prose. We like went and each wrote our 8 stories and came back, and then we trying to like match the timeline. And one of my stories, the timeline wasn't quite working based on how all the other stories had unfolded. So I had to like cut off this like the second half of the story and rewrite it. And as we were brainstorming and coming up with a new idea, he was like, "This is a comic book character." And I was like, okay, I'm like, what do you want me to do with that? He's like, well, you should write a comic book. And I was like, no, like I wanted to be a novelist. I didn't really like this wasn't really like the direction I wanted. But again, at the end of the phone call, I'm like, hypothetically, like what would this look like? And then so we kind of went through it and I was like using his scripts as kind of like a way to format. And then I started writing this comic book and it was going to be a big graphic novel. And then we decided actually to split it up into like 4 issues first, do like a 4 issue character arc or story arc. And yeah, that's how I got sucked in. And then as I was writing that, we were doing other projects. As we like published stuff and people saw what we were doing, a few creators took notice. Because he started off as like a comic reviewer with Comic Crusaders, and a whole bunch of those people were kind of like, hey, I saw what you're doing. Like, do you think you could help me get my book out there as well? And I think that was kind of like sparked a little, it's like, yeah, I guess maybe we can help distribute people's books and help them publish. So then we created an imprint where based because like so the main ASAP titles are like all under like the ASAP like IP. So they're all like
Mhm.
interconnected and ASAP owns them. But obviously we didn't want to like take people's IPs. So we like created this imprint called the NE1 World, where people could bring their stories to us and that we just help them publish. So like we help them find artists, we help them edit, we help them do covers, like format, like even some people just come to us with ideas or scripts. Like we're basically just helping people along the way where we can. And we launched that whole thing with basically a charity anthology where a whole bunch of people submitted. Again, it was prose. They submitted stories to us, and we had a whole bunch of people working with us. We had like an editor who volunteered her time and a cover designer who same thing volunteered her time. But I was managing it all, and like I think it's right after we launched it. He's like, "Do you want to be the editor in chief of ASAP?" And I was kind of like, again, no. I was like, that sounds like a lot of work. Absolutely not. But he's just like, you're already doing it. He's like, you might as well just take the title as well. So I'm like, okay. So yeah, so now I'm the editor in chief. And then so like people submit stuff to us and we opened it up to novels. And now we also opened up an online bookstore. So to basically like we're selling the people that we publish on our site, but we basically opened it up for anyone who has a comic book or a graphic novel or a novel, such as like a digital bookstore, digital distribution. So people come to one spot and they can look at all these titles in one place and just get more eyes on your work. And then we also recently, or like last year, we opened it up to physical distributions. Again, people don't necessarily publish, can bring their stuff to us. And now we're trying to get it into like comic shops all over the world and major bookstores like in the UK. A whole bunch of them are in Waterstones, which is like the Barnes and Noble of
Okay.
the
So,
UK.
um, so ASAP Imagination is basically the parent company that has an imprint called NE1. ASAP has like its own universe and IP, but people can still submit to ASAP to possibly get published under that.
No, so that's like
Only
its own
anyone.
thing. Yeah,
Okay.
only the NE1 World. Like we work with other writers and stuff and artists and stuff that we bring in to help us write RRP, but like people come in with their
Gotcha.
own
So you
ideas,
don't
that's
do
through
any
the NE1 World.
creator owned stuff under ASAP. It's all the ASAP stuff, and you'll hire people for your own IP to create that stuff for that universe. But under the NE1 imprint, um, you'll take on not just comics but also prose, and you allow people to publish digitally. You said and physically. So whenever you say physically, does that mean that like people upload the the finished thing? And then you pay for printing, or is it more like a print on demand if people buy from your shop?
No, it's like we have a printer that we work with and we print however many copies we want because obviously we need to have stock to take to cons and to bookstores and stuff. And then the creators also order however many they want. Like we have a couple of creators who just recently did some Kickstarters and they're using us to like fulfill their Kickstarter
I get
campaign
you.
as well.
Okay. And
So, but then we also order stuff for our stuff so we can like also get their books out to whoever wants them.
nice. So yeah, just like any other traditional publisher, to where it's like you accept submissions, and if you get accepted and to be published through them, you go through the normal process. And like you said, so you're getting people into, you're saying you're working to get people into comic shops, and haven't quite yet, or you already have books in comic shops?
Yeah, we have some. Um, we have some over in the UK, like oh, I'm drawing such a blank on what the major what are the major Forbidden Planet. That's like
Okay.
one of the major chains over there. And then here we have so I'm doing like the legwork over here, but I have like two very small children, so it's kind of like if I bring them to comic book stores and talk to people, they're like ripping books off the shelves, and I'm like
Oh
still like
yeah.
it's
So
very distracting.
you act as
And
the distributor to the comic shop. So you know it's not like you're getting your books into some kind of distribution catalog. You actually are going
yeah,
physically to stores and being like, "Here's my catalog. Will
yeah,
you
yeah.
take?" Okay, okay. Well, all right. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're kind of doing like all like we're in all of the process, and we're a digital bookstore. We're not a physical bookstore. But
Yeah.
obviously when we go to cons, that's kind of as close because you set up a table and you're like, that's as close to a bookstore as we're
And
gonna
that's the
get for
smartest way to
now.
do it nowadays anyway. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
but yeah,
food
like rental
trucks.
and
It's
yeah, like
like you only
rentals
really
and
make
property
money
tax
during
and
events. There's
yeah.
no reason to have a physical bookstore if people aren't going to buy your books in bulk. They only buy them during like huge events. Uh, like yeah, it's just like having a food truck where you just work for weddings and you go on the weekend to a downtown district or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
Dang, that's interesting. So you went from like zero pre-COVID to now you are doing everything worldwide,
Yeah,
having your
yeah,
own
we've taken on a
universe,
lot.
and you're the editor in chief of now this imprint. So whenever people submit, do you accept virtually any what are your sort of restrictions or what do you send away, so to speak?
Like what do we reject, I
Yeah, what
guess?
do you reject?
So right now we focus heavily on like horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and superhero. Comics, there's like a little wiggle room just because comics. It's hard to just be like someone comes to us with this great idea and we're like, we can make it work. So like we have like more into like thrillers or like crime and like we don't do a ton of like romance and like contemporary like it's all very like a speculative element, I would say, to like a good extent. I think horror and thriller probably have a bit of an exception there because obviously you can have horror that's just like murderers and crime, right? Like
No, yeah, I
it's not
get
all
you.
ghosts and
Yeah,
aliens,
yeah.
I guess, right? So
There's plenty of subgenres within horror that are just kind of uh frowned upon.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's some stuff like we have like some exceptions. Like I don't think we'd go too gory. Like we're not looking for like body horror and stuff like that. Like we want people to be creative, but we also like we try to promote a family friendly platform because we also have this ASAP Minis, which is children's books, where it's basically like the NE1 World, but it's more focused toward kids. So you can like go buy like light, happy books
Yeah,
about
totally get you.
bears and
You're like,
and children's superheroes and stuff like that. So it's like again, we don't want to like have too much crossover and like a someone click on something and be like, oh God.
okay.
so so yeah, so we have that too, and we try to keep it family friendly. And like we don't have like a ton. So like we all kind of have adult and children, and we're starting to get into like the YA middle grade kind of stuff as well. Because a lot of or not a lot, but some of our comics are more family friendly, so it kind of like encompasses that already. And especially at Comic Cons, like families come, right? And I know like at the very start, people would come to our table and be like, "Oh, do you have anything for like my 10-year-old?" And I'm like, it's kind of horror. Or like
Oh my goodness.
it's not like super aggressive, but like there's some swears and there's maybe some like dead bodies.
I still
So
feel bad for I have some pretty hardcore comics that kids come up and I'm just like, you can look through it. Like it's like I'm not gonna tell you no, but if
yeah.
your dad comes up, there's no nudity or anything, but there is cursing. There's a lot of violence, and I've even had like parents be like, "Is this okay for a 12-year-old?" I'm like, "Well, it's rated R." Like I was
Yeah.
like, it's like
The
essentially an R-rated movie. Um,
yeah.
but it's yeah. So yeah, I feel bad for like sort of like leading people in, be like, you can go for it. Like I'm not gonna tell you.
Yeah, well, it's tricky. So like last year I went to HorrorCon here and like the number of kids there who were like small and wearing like like It t-shirts, or just all these like horror movie, or it's just like, hey, that's
Yeah,
like Jason, and how you're like 6.
yeah.
So it's like, okay, like, have you seen that? And that's I like, I don't know. And like parents, like kids have different
It's it. I was, yeah, with my
ways of
own
dealing with
kids.
things, and parents do their own thing, but
I realized the same
it's a
thing
bit
that
much.
I realized number one is all of that is just so much in pop culture. Like whenever I went to a con with my kid, whenever she was like 5 years old, she was obsessed with it. And I was like, why do you want to be with it? Or, the clown, the scariest
Yeah.
costume out there. And it was because of like YouTube. And she just knew that character through that. And plus, like Roblox and these games have sort of these pop culture icons that are associated with kids at nowadays. Like
Yeah.
even Michael Myers and yeah, it's like I'm not trying to censor them from horror. But it was just confusing to where it's just like, yeah, how do you know so much about these that like and I remember reading or listening to Rob Zombie talk about how 15 years ago he couldn't even get House of a Thousand Corpses approved with a less than NC-17 rating. Like the movie, if you've seen it, the
Yeah.
horror
I haven't
film he
seen the movie,
made.
but I
It,
know of the
it's
movie.
he was going for it to be such a hardcore horror movie that it like tested the boundaries of what should be allowed. It was kind of so hardcore of like sort of back in the I guess grindhouse days and like 70s and 80s really graphic horror. And so point being it's very borderline hardcore horror. Not
Yeah.
typical fantasy of like ghosts like nowadays that kids probably could handle. Um it's definitely like crosses the boundary to where you wouldn't want someone under the age of 13 to watch these movies and keep their sanity. And I love horror.
Yeah.
But it's just
Yeah.
funny that nowadays, 15 years later, Universal, the same company that basically denied his version the first time, they're now begging him to take that IP of House of a Thousand Corpses and make it family friendly throughout their Universal park. So nowadays there's kids going through a House of a Thousand Corpses theme section of a park at Universal Studios during Halloween times. And
Yeah.
and you think about it, it's like this like the yeah, it's like this is the ultimate boundaries. It's like me watching a Clockwork Orange. Have you seen that
Yeah.
movie?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen
At
that
the
one.
or and then like as you're like nowadays, you just see kids going through a Clockwork Orange themed section of Disney World, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this was
Yeah.
borderline my whole life of sort of like crossing the boundaries of like what's socially acceptable in the sense like anyway. I just think that's funny
Yeah.
how like things have times have sort of changed in the sense of like whenever I was younger, what was considered PG-13 or even PG. Like you watch, I remember whenever PG-13 came about, it was like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins and these movies that like it was like right in the mid 80s to where it was I guess like the rating system MPAA was like we can't rate this PG. Like this isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, Temple of Doom literally has a sacrifice scene where a guy's heart is taken out and he's sent
Yeah.
to a volcano. And it's like
Yeah.
and they're like, "All right, we got to put something in the middle." And but nowadays it's like things have gotten softer to where PG-13 is almost like some of that stuff is like doesn't even need to be PG-13. It's probably could a pass or PG. But
Yeah.
and then you get like this weird stuff where it's like all of a sudden House of a Thousand Corpses is in pop culture for everybody. Now
Yeah.
I forgot why I went on this tangent and what you're talking. Oh yeah, because
That's
Comic Cons. The other
yeah.
point I was gonna get at was yeah, like you're saying, is kids come to these cons. It's family friendly, and you're sort of trying to sell your work and you want to like let people know like it is it is family friendly, it doesn't go too extreme, but yeah, my point I was going to get at is the what parents find acceptable is so loose nowadays.
Yeah.
It's like it and it's hard for me to explain where it's like I would be okay letting my kid read my stuff if they were over the age of 11, but other people I know they're a lot stricter and they would probably
Yeah.
not even let their kids read it in high school.
Yeah, well, and it
some people.
also depends on the kid too. Like my daughter is very sensitive to like that kind of stuff. But there's some stuff like she's really afraid of and she's like, I don't like this. But then like I know like the Halloween this past year, I was watching Nightmare Before Christmas with my little 2-year old because he's too young to like get it. And I was kind of just I kind of use him to like test movies. I'm like, is this scary? Because I like it gives me a reason to watch him, and then he's a little entertained. But then I watched it and then I was just like, oh, she'll hate this. Like Oogie Boogie is terrifying. And then like she like came home from school and like saw this on the TV and she's like, can I watch it? I'm like, ooh, we'll try. Like, let me know if it's too scary. And she like turned it off the first time, but then she's like, I want to try again. And now it's like one of her favorite movies. Like at Halloween, she's like watching it like every day. And so like you never know what's gonna happen. But then meanwhile, like Finding Nemo, she doesn't like it because the sharks are too scary. Like we can't
Yeah,
get past the sharks. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's different kids, different parenting, and so it's
and
like
I
all
remember,
different stuff goes going on.
yeah, my daughter was the same, but not with Nightmare. It was with Coraline. She
Oh,
loved Coraline.
Carline's so messed up.
And I'm like, yeah, and I'm watching it again as an adult, just kind of like, there's so much that it does just make you, once you have kids, I feel way more sensitive around everything. Like the things that I
Yeah.
never second guessed at all in the past. For example, like we went to Disney World and you go to the Haunted Mansion ride. It's like constantly referencing wives killing their husbands and cutting off their heads and things like that. And I was like, that's a little, it's like, yeah, it doesn't affect the kids. And and I know, and it's like, it's kind of all in fun or whatever, especially like Halloween. But then you realize like all this stuff is referencing like murder, like
Yeah.
and just like normalizing really
Yeah.
extreme, crazy scenarios, and we're all just like, whoa, we, like I don't
Yeah.
know, it is
Well,
just strange, like looking at it, like, should we accept this as like normal in culture? And it's like I've always been fine with it, obviously, but it does make you second guess it. And I start to understand like why some parents, whenever I was younger, like refrained from letting kids play video games like Grand Theft Auto and stuff. Cause it's,
yeah.
yeah, you don't want to normalize like it totally, or it just feels weird. Even if like it might not like really like affect their brains or whatever to where they're just like, no, I'm going to go hit people in real life. You don't have to believe that that's the truth, but without to make it seem weird to accept it amongst kids anyway. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's like as things technology gets better and graphics get better, because like I like grew up in that era where like we went from like Worm or like Jill of the Jungle or like to like Mario. And then there's like all these like low quality like pixelated and like not high quality graphics in today's standards by any means. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you get into like I remember when Resident Evil came out, I'm like, and then Grand Theft Auto, like there's like a huge conversation about violence in video games,
Yeah, I remember
and it
that.
because
Yeah.
and it became so realistic, and now it's just like, yeah, whatever, Resident Evil. Like, what kid doesn't get eaten? What kid doesn't know zombies and hasn't
Yeah.
been eaten by them? Whereas like, I think I was like old. I think the first time I played it, I'm like, this is terrifying.
Yeah,
Like I
the
didn't have that desensitization that started early, so it's
uh
definitely changed.
since we're still like just since we're still talking about it, I don't think I've brought this up on other podcasts, but I took a long break from video games. I didn't play my whole upbringing was I was always a generation behind. So whenever the
Yeah.
Sega Genesis was out, I got like the original Nintendo. Whenever the like
Yeah.
PlayStation 1 came out, that's finally whenever I got the Sega Genesis. Whenever the PlayStation 2 came out, I got the PlayStation 1. And whenever the 3 came out, I was finally old enough like a teenager to where I bought a PS2 myself. Um, and then like outside of high school, I didn't play anything for like 10 years. So, and that was whenever the big revolution in games happened between like
Yeah.
I want to say like PlayStation 1, 2 up to what we are at now like 4 or 5. So whenever the
Yeah.
PlayStation 5 came out, this was like 3 years ago, I want to say, like right around 2020, maybe 2021. Uh, that was whenever I got the PS4. Once again, still a generation behind. And then I decided I hadn't played any games for like 10 years. I didn't play any of the so many games that came out apparently, and I mean they were like revolutionary. And once again, people were talking about how kind of crazy they were and violent they were. And at this point, Grand Theft Auto was up to like 5 or something like that. Um, but I just bought it, and then I was like, I'm gonna download just whatever seems fun that's on the deals page. So what was on the deals like PlayStation is games that were like 10 years old.
Yeah.
And one looked interesting. It was called Outlast 2. And for anybody that knows games and knows Outlast, I go from like zero to playing this game. Outlast 2 is like probably one of the most violent, scary, horrifying, like known to be like scary even amongst people that play horror games. Uh,
Yeah.
the concept of it is like you're abandoned in this religiously fanatic middle of nowhere, and everyone's being sacrificed and skinned alive, and just and you're trying to escape this
Yeah.
horrible nightmare. And I'm just like, what did I miss? I was like, and to me the graphics were amazing. Like it just seemed, I was just like, there's no way, like this is the deals game. Like to me this was like the best game. Like it was absolutely terrifying, amazing graphics that were so good. It was just it mind blowing. And then like I couldn't, I walked outside and I just felt like the heaviness of the game is so realistic. But then I remember like being like, man, this is so much fun living this horrible nightmare. And like I don't know, it's just like, but it's just
Horror
so
junkies
interesting.
are a weird breed, hey? I love
Yeah,
this disgusting violent stuff.
but
It keeps
yeah,
me
it's
awake at
just,
night.
and that's like old games. So I can't imagine like where they are even now, like with the new PlayStation 5 and stuff like that. But
Yeah. Well, I think that was I think so like I had a bit of a gap too because like my older brother he like really like influenced like he's the reason I played video games because like he wanted to. Um but then once he moved out and I did my own thing I was fine but then I guess like once I met my partner like kind of video games came back and I remember like same thing like I kind of went from like the controllers where you have like up down side to side and like A and B.
yeah, yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's just like he pulls out Call of Duty and I'm like it's like, okay, and I got these, I got these, I got these. And it's
Yeah.
like, and like, it's too much. And it's just like,
Uh,
I think I don't have the skill. And also I have a
Nowadays,
very addictive personality. I'm like, if I ever want to complete anything, I need to that isn't just video games. I need to not get into
yeah,
video games.
I get too sucked into them as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I was gonna say. Nowadays, they added in like it's not just the buttons and stuff; it's the angle at which you hold them,
Oh my
and it
God.
also includes your
I'm not into
breath.
that.
So sometimes, like if you're hanging on, you have to like blow into the controller and like shake it.
It's so complicated.
It's
No way.
wild, yeah. But yeah, I have no time. So to me, these things are like amazing. I play a game, and then 3 years later, and I just like play again or something. But oh
Yeah.
man, I guess we'll get back to the business. Side tangent about horror
Tangent.
and video games and censorship.
Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to, I guess we already talked about sort of printing, distribution. You have a partnership with printing. You do the single-handedly distribution by actually either going to comic shops or I'm guessing email or calling comic shops, and you're slowly growing there. How much IP do you have under both ASAP and the imprint? Like how many titles do you, let's say, accept a year or release per year?
Well, I don't know if I have that exact answer for you. So under Our World, which is all of like ASAP's IP, there are 8 titles, I believe. And now we're starting to get into the graphic novels. So that's on the Kickstarter. We have the Complete Points of Villainy, which is a compilation of the first 3 issues of Points of Villainy, which is the first half of the anthology we wrote back that were like got turned into comics. So that one could maybe be counted as a ninth, but it's really just like a collection of one title.
Okay.
Um, and then on the NE1 World, ooh, it's hard to know.
Yeah, if
Like
you
and it
don't know,
grows all the
yeah.
time. I want to say like 100 to 200. Like it's a very wide range. I want to
Oh,
say we're like at a
that's a
hundred or so.
lot. Like
But that
titles or individual issues? Like,
and it's funny. I want to say titles, but it might be including individual. I'm just trying to like
okay.
think of how many pages of stuff we have on our website, and it's quite a few. but it's one of those things of like I have to count.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
it's
no, I
probably
was just
maybe like into like titles, maybe like we'll maybe between 50 and 100. Like maybe I'll lower it a little bit
but still
because
that's a lot within a
yeah.
few years. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and it's growing and we're getting new people all the
what's the
time and
main way that you generate income? Like, how do you pay? I guess, like, do you do Kickstarters or do you go, or is it through cons or is it mostly through your website or is it just a pretty much even mix across every avenue that you have? Like, what are your different
um
revenue streams?
it's a mix. Again, I don't have exact numbers, but obviously like when we first started it was through COVID, so it was very like internet. We just started with a Kickstarter and then kind of got out of that for a while and we're just doing like in-house funding. And then we're back in the Kickstarter game. So we're doing it that way. And then once COVID kind of opened things up, we started going to cons and yeah, basically just in whatever way we can.
Yeah,
Like,
that's how we all
yeah, and
do
we're
it, I
just like,
guess.
yeah, yeah, literally like however we can make money to kind of keep us doing what we love, right? Like we're constantly looking for new streams and stuff. Like even coming up soon, like Hades over in the UK, we work with some people who also make movies. Like some of our creators are like independent filmmakers. So they're doing a cinema night over there, and basically they're like selling tickets, and people are gonna. I think there's 4 movies that people are gonna show, and then people are also gonna be selling the comic books that relate to the movies because they're usually connected in some way.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, like we're just trying new
So
things like that, and obviously cons and
that brings me to how does this all relate to Hades and the collaborative or cooperative or whatever gig is? I can't remember what it stands for, but whenever I downloaded that file, like what is
yeah.
that and how do people get a part of it and like how did that start and all that?
Yeah, for sure. So we started that last year and we originally started like on its own website and it was like this platform where people could like pay to kind of be on the, like represent featured on there, but it's people we kind of worked with or people that we would vet. So it was things like you're not a bot and you're not an AI artist.
Yeah.
Um and so like stuff like that. So we kind of like vet people. And then people could pay a monthly subscription basically. And if you only needed it for a month, but you could just pay for a month. It was basically as long as you needed it. So you could access artists and writers and publishers and reviewers and podcasts, basically a whole bunch of people we work with or people that heard about us and submitted to us to be vetted. But then this year, was it this year? I think it was this year. We basically like we announced last year that we are going to do it, but like we started in January. We basically we'd kind of like websites everywhere. Like we had like ASAP, we had NE1 World, we had ASAP Minis, and we had the Global Indie Group. So we took ASAP Minis since it was basically already kind of like it's already IP like creator owned. We put that with the NE1 World. So now there's like kind of adult books and then children books. And then we took Gig and we decided to basically move it into the Any World. And it was already kind of a directory. Like it was never like a social media thing where people like interacted with each other. It's more like kind of you click on someone and then you go email them and like do your business offline. And we're kind of like, this is really just a directory. So why don't we just like sell it as a directory instead? So now it's just a one-time purchase where I can't even tell you off the top. It's not expensive, but it's
I
just
know.
like
I got it. It's $10.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
It's a
well
10
worth it.
bucks, and it basically has like a big list of a whole bunch of people that you can work with. And again, if you want to be listed there, it'd just be something that you would contact like through the NE1 World. You could go through like all of our stuff lead to me or Hades.
Yeah.
And Hades is the guy that kind of like sets that up and vets people and all that stuff. So at any time, podcasters, reviewers, writers, artists, whoever can contact us and just be like, hey, I want to be part of a gig. And then they can get involved. That's really,
Cool. Yeah, makes
and then we
sense.
update it.
All
And
right. Yeah, yeah.
the next
No,
time people download it, you're there.
I do think it's from my own personal experience, so much tries to go through sort of a subscription model, and we all have too many subscriptions and too many things to get a hold of. It's way easier for me to just download something, print it off if I want it, or just set it into a folder.
Yeah.
Because I have a folder that's dedicated to everyone in my network, like virtually everyone that I've worked with. Um, and or so it's a pretty massive list, and I just add that to that, add the gig file to like that file. I'm just like, so now I basically have a whole studio at my fingertips just in this file this file folder on my computer,
Yeah.
and now people want access to that folder. Like,
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah,
that
I didn't
was
realize how valuable it is just to have the information about other people in this industry. But it is because I need.
yeah. Well, it's hard like being someone who like started off like from square one where I'm like, I'm a writer. How do I find an artist? Like it's like literally or how do we even write a script or like anything like that? It's kind of like there are so many like things to learn. And it's
Yeah,
so hard to like vet people. Like I know like through ASAP, like we work was working with Hades to find artists and all that stuff. But I also had like my own book, that one that I was doing, and I like went to go find an artist. And I know I just went, it's like it's not comic, but it's like geared towards adults. It's called Babies with Rabies. It's like a ABC survival rhyming guide, like a zombie parody,
okay.
like a gift book for like new parents. And basically like I went to a children's book like Facebook group, and it's just like, hey, I have this project, is anyone interested in illustrating it? And I like hundreds of responses, and I'm like, oh, okay, number one. Look at the
Yeah,
portfolio. Like
that's like you said, you when you go from zero, you don't even know where to start. And then once you
yeah,
try, you get overwhelmingly too many and you can't distinguish like, well, who's professional and who's not. That's why like, whenever
yeah,
people ask me, I always go, it's kind of like, well, if you're going completely outside in and know nothing, and it's like, well, that means you might not know any you don't read comics, but it's like the best place to find someone that you want to illustrate comics is look at who illustrates comics from your comic shop
yeah,
and for people that don't know anything at all, I then send them to places like, well, to find comics that are, up to your par, you go to independent places like ASAP Imagination, or you go to League of Comic Geeks to see everything that goes through the shops, or you go to Barnes and
yeah,
Noble and look up the stuff and you can see previews of the kind of artists that are in there. But so many
yeah, for
people,
sure.
when you're starting from zero, you don't realize that sort of everyone doing this is just people like you. It's not like there's some barrier to where you're like, well, if they're doing books that are in Barnes and Noble, there's no way I can afford them. It's like as you know, it's like once you send out send out the you reach out to them, I'm sure that they're looking for work just like everybody else. They just
Yeah, for
might
sure.
charge a bit more. But if you're wanting a high quality book, that's how the route you have to go. And then if you aren't concerned about making it so high quality to where it can get into Barnes and Noble, uh, then go to the independent creators and you can find them on the independent publishing houses
Yeah.
and presses and databases like Global Comics or even just Webtoons and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. When I know like I went to Facebook, but I know there's been a few times where like way back when we were starting at ASAP, we put a few things out on Twitter, and oh my God, the bots.
Oh
And that's the
yeah.
thing too, where it's just like you don't know. And there's like also the people where there's like groups of people who they're like, oh yeah, this is like our art style, but really there's like 20 different like cheap artists that they outsource, and the art styles are like super variable and stuff. So it's like so hard to know. Where like
It's
now, like a few people have come to me like, hey, do you know any like artists? Like I'm having troubles, and like unless people are like specifically mention a style and I can like point them towards someone, like I'm just like, just check out Gig. Like we have a whole bunch of artists, like they're various different styles. And then obviously if people like I typically like, well, do you need help publishing? Like always, do you need help publishing? Because obviously I work for a publisher. But
yeah,
like if they
yeah.
don't, I'm just like, well, then just download Gig. If they want publishing, like obviously like then we can like help find artists. But like beyond that, I'm just like, I don't know people's style. I don't know like what they're looking for. But like these people I know like we've worked with or we've vetted, and they're like very good and they're like reasonably priced. And
Yeah, and that's worth something because, like you
yeah,
were saying, there's so much that can go wrong. Of if people are like truly scamming, or like you say, outsourcing
yeah,
just because someone said they like the style. But also, you just get so many artists that cannot take on the work, or they'll say that they can and then just can't finish. And then, as a writer or a producer of a comic, you're totally kind of screwed if someone gives up halfway through because you need
yeah,
a
for
full
sure.
story, and it's just like, oh, so yeah, and no one likes to read I say no one likes, but it's just it is unfortunate to have a series start with one artist and then have it end with a different one, which sometimes is what has to happen. And
Yeah, and it does happen, and like people's lives change, or people lose interest in
yeah, and it's not, yeah, like
sequential comics and stuff,
it's
right?
not always because the artist is like a bad person. Just things come up in life, and that's another thing is people forget that this is for the artist perspective. It is a really tough game.
Yeah,
I just talked to a world class, famous top, to one of the top artists in the world. His name's Brow, and he is from Brazil, but he was talking. I was like, what? When do you get too overwhelmed? Because once you're at his status, you get a lot of requests for work and you can't take on all of it. And you have to really vet on the other end, the writers and like the stories and like which ones you're going to take on. And he was talking about how hard it is to really gauge to of sort of lining up his next project while he's working on one and narrowing down like what that next project actually should be. And I was like, well, what is it? Point I'm getting at is he said best case scenario, he can finish one page a day working 5 days a week. He said that's
yeah,
best case scenario. So that means that throughout a year, whatever that is, um, that's how many pages at tops he can do. And I talked to a lot of other artists, and they're basically saying the same thing, is that best case scenario you can do one page a day. And in reality,
yeah,
it's really slower than that. It's really more like um you take up a amount of time to do the sketches and stuff before you can then finally actually start doing a page per day.
yeah,
So it's almost like you need a week of vetting or whatever of the actual outlining kind of thing before you can actually just start pumping them out. But that once you like narrow that down the numbers, they cannot do much more than like one or two graphic novels a year. Uh,
yeah,
and so whenever people are coming at artists or artists that say they sort of just take on all this work, uh, they're either just not doing like the quality to where they're doing more than one page per day, and the quality's not really up to a standard people might want,
yeah,
or it's the other end to where they take on work that they just can't finish and everything's delayed and delayed. And that's but yeah, so it's a tough game. And so then when you think about it, if they can really only do one page a day, their page rate, that's like their salary. And you think about like that, it's like, can you live off of $50 a day, or whatever?
yeah, yeah,
And that's what people sometimes like come to these artists and they're like, I can't pay you more than 50. And some of the artists are like, well, if you're all I've got and I don't have my next, book lined up, I might have to take that because you're thinking about, well, if 50 times, 20 or 30 or whatever, like maybe I can just like figure it all out. But then of course, once you take on the work, and that's why so many people I feel like give up. Whenever people come to me with their stories of their artist bailing on them, I'm like, well, how much were they? And they're like, well, they were like 70 a page. And I'm like, that's your problem. It's like no one can really, it's really tough to do this job for that low. It's a lot for
yeah,
you. I understand that. But on the other end, it's a lot of work for them to do that. And it doesn't always make ends meet, and they can get overworked and burnt out. And if you're not really cool with them, or if you don't give them a long time frame to finish it, because that's the thing is if you give them a long time frame and be like, we don't need this done in 6 months or whatever, then they can actually be like, well, I'm going to do 2 pages with this book this week, 2 pages with my other book this week, and then you can make it work. So it's like you got to make
yeah,
some kind of balance where like you give them plenty of time and less money, or you give them like all the money up front and then you give them a deadline or whatever it is. Anyway, I
yeah.
I could rant all day.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, there's a lot to juggle, and it's like on both sides. Like same thing where it's just like you can pay an artist and they can disappear. But same thing, it's the other side where it's like if you're an artist, like you can do a whole bunch of art for something, and then someone, the writer disappears or whatever. Where like obviously, and then not obviously like not everyone who writes draws, and not everyone who draws writes. So there is like definitely it's a collaboration. But
Yeah.
it's a collaboration typically with like someone you've never met and strangers, and it's like money and stuff. So like you gotta have like stuff in place and contracts and
Yeah, that's what I also
Communication is really like so key because like I know for
100, yeah.
like what every time everyone we work with, I'm just like excuse me, like we give like expectations and deadlines, but I'm just like, if something happens, that's like life happens, but let me know. Because obviously, like as like the editor in chief, I'm managing like multiple projects and like expectations of people. Like, so I'm just like, hey, you were supposed to have this done last week. Like, I haven't heard from you. And then like it's like someone's like, oh, work's been busy, or like I'd prefer to know like in advance that
Hey,
like
at
work is
least
getting really busy, or like had a death in the family, or I'm sick, or anything, right? Or just feeling overwhelmed and I need a couple extra days. Like anything is, as long as there's communication, like for me, that is understandable. Like obviously at some point people also have to finish the work, but like there's definitely leeway, and like we're all
at,
people.
at
we're
least
not we're not machines.
if you're serious about it, that's a good sign. Because almost every publisher I've worked with, the main issue is always communication from their end. You
Yeah.
never, and I understand it from their perspective because they're basically waiting on communication from somebody else. And they had, and but that's almost like most recently, about a month or two ago, there was a big controversy with Scout Comics, who I was published with a few
Yeah.
years ago, where everybody was saying they weren't communicating. They were essentially accused of not paying people, and or at least not communicating with the creators about why they weren't paid, most likely because their books didn't make any money.
Yeah.
But a lot of other things. They were accused of kind of taking doing work on their own, like hiring artists to do covers and then not getting approval from the creators to publish those or make those at least the A covers kind of things. And I've had
Yeah.
experience with that with other publishers as well, but it's always communication to where it's like, if you would have just let me know, I would have said yes, but you didn't
Yeah.
reach out to me, or I reached out to you about A, B, and C, and you responded with to C, but you ignored A and B. And it's just
Yeah.
like, the communication is always where failures fall apart. It most of the time, if someone just communicates a between a publisher and a creator, or between creator and creator, to where it's like, if you just let me know, hey, I'm not feeling well, or my wife is sick, or my kids are acting a fool in school, or whatever,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fine. We're okay taking the break. But if you don't respond, like you said, this is a business, and I've had the same experience producing films, to where some people don't see it as a business. If it's a really low budget movie, people will come on and sort of just see it as like, oh, this is just some goofy thing we're doing on the weekend, where everybody else is like, no, this is very serious. Like, we're doing this on our off days, but we are trying to make the best movie possible. And they're like, but it's a goofy movie. And it's like, yeah, it's a goofy movie from the viewer's perspective. That doesn't mean that we take it
Yeah.
unseriously, like it's
Yeah.
not. And same with comics, where some people see it as, this is just your hobby. What do you care about? It's like, yeah, it's a hobby, but we do expect it to be high quality and on deadlines, and we do make money from this. It is a business. It's not, we're just because we're not just rolling in the dough, it doesn't mean that it's not a very large aspect of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like, and I think that is important. Like, it's just like, yes, you can do this as a hobby, but like for sure, like we are running a business and we want to like, kind of like you said, people are writing stuff about like all kinds of stuff, like some silly, some's like very serious, and like, or like, and I know like fiction and comics kind of get a weird rap sometimes if they're like not being like real books sometimes. So like, but no, like we run it like very seriously, and like it's, even if I don't have updates, sometimes I like email people. I'm like, the update is that there's no update because it's
Hey, that's
like it's
cool.
yeah, like it's literally because like again like I'm not editing everything. Like I'm not always like in the nitty gritty because I'm kind of like more like again like sometimes project management, but a lot of the stuff that like I have to like proofread and stuff, and it is like it's very much just like I know that I need to do this for you, but it's like I need to finish this project, and like this month is like I have like note to my future self next year. I'm like, don't book so many things in April because like I have like two con like one con this month, but the other one's like just the weekend right after, so like the first week of May, and then like we have our Kickstarter that we're running this month, which like that we had good reason for doing it in April, but in hindsight, like maybe we should have done it. Like it's
There,
working, like we
yeah.
fund it and stuff, but like it's so busy. And then like a whole bunch of projects have come due, and like Hades is at a con this weekend. And so it's like we just got like a lot of stuff. So like my emails to people, I'm like just like I like, hey, like this is on my list, but it needs to wait like a couple weeks. And it's just like how the publishing industry works. And like we don't want to be as slow as like some traditional publishers where people like it's like, hey, I'm getting a book published with ASAP. It's coming out in 2027. Like that's not what we want to do for people. Like we at least want to like obviously things take time. Like artists need to draw and like editors need to edit. So and there is like you're lining up a whole bunch of people. So things do take some time and we don't just want to like rush things and put things out. And like I said, life happens. But
Yeah,
yeah, like we try and like we do really follow our names mantra. Like we do put things out ASAP.
nice.
Like it's
That's
always like as
awesome.
soon as possible.
I that leads me to sort of my final question is do you guys do marketing for your IP and your creator-owned books that you take on? And if so, what kind of marketing do you do?
So we do like I hope some different things. Like so obviously, social media is like a heavily rely on that just to like hit as many people as possible. It's just because so many people are online now. So like ASAP Imagination is thankfully the normal that handle on everything. So like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I feel like I'm missing one. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. No, maybe that's all of them.
It,
Um,
yeah, those are the main
yeah,
ones
for some
for
reason
sure.
I'm like, there's so many social media platforms. I'm like, was that it?
The,
um, and then like I'm out there, but my handle's different on everywhere because I'm a late adopter to like social media. So like I start do one handle and then like by the time like I got to Instagram, my handle was gone. I'm like, and then I've never
oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
changed them all back, which I should, but I like to play hard to get. So yeah, social media is obviously big. Cons, we're doing it basically like anything. We reach out to bookstores and we do signing events and we try and like some of our authors and creators who like lived close to each other geographically, we tried to like do combined signing events so you can kind of like pull in different audiences. And obviously like we do things like the cinema night and
Oh,
yeah, just like
whoa,
and
okay.
like
Yeah, so
cons
you have like
obviously.
real, you throw events. Do you have an email list at all that you sort of like whenever people go to your website, you ask them to join the email list to learn for updates or anything like that?
Basically everyone who buys stuff through us like is like on an unofficial list. Obviously
Okay,
people can opt out of it. But yeah, I think it's like when you check out, you can like sign me up. Like I
nice.
have my own newsletter, but it's like through my website, which is it's kind of it's I'm super sporadic with it and not like don't do the monthly newsletter like I
Yeah,
should.
I'm the same way. I should be more
But
consistent, but it's sporadic.
yeah, and then like through the NE1 world, like obviously like it is like in theory it's like a bookstore like it's not anywhere near as big as like Amazon or something, but we try to very much make a community so that you're not just a number or not just like a book. So we have like little groups and stuff, and basically when something's coming out, we like share and like and we ask people like, can you share this out? And so it's like that very like word of mouth, like
Okay.
if one friend tells their friend and their friend tells another friend, like we try and do that very like organic grassroots, like the people we work with champion each other and we do try and create a community so that like
Okay.
creating can be very lonely because like obviously like you can just like you're writing your ideas down like comics is a little more collaborative because obviously like unless you draw and write yourself like you're working with at least one more person but that's like
Yeah.
always the thing like you're trying to like just build a network to spread the word and you hope that the right person hears it and hit that tipping point and then suddenly something goes viral like basically or becomes a bestseller or
Yeah,
demand goes crazy for it, right?
I gotcha. Yeah, that I mean, there are whenever you talk to like marketing experts, there are so many routes that they take. And
Yeah.
so like when someone says social media, a marketing person will go, "Well, what do you do on social media?" And it'll be like, "Well, I post." And they'll be like,
Yeah.
are you
I
and
post pictures of my cat.
yeah, and I didn't realize until I started getting into this world. But it'll be like there's one guy that just dedicates to how he posts things on Pinterest, and
Yeah.
how they basically, if they're having a book that's uh supernatural horror, they know exactly what to do and what to post and how many times to post it and who and what. And then if they're doing something on Facebook, they know exactly what groups to join, where to post the images, what images to post, and what kind of ads to make and where to send the ads and all this kind of stuff. And then if it's just YouTube, they know exactly what kind of videos that you
Yeah.
should be making or what kind of YouTube people you should be partner with. And that's where I sort of came into this, is people came to my YouTube channel that were already experts in the social media of YouTube. And I didn't even realize that YouTube was considered a social media. I didn't
Yeah.
even know
Yeah.
that
Just making videos for fun.
you can post tweets on YouTube to people that follow you, or the
Yeah.
equivalent to tweets. Or like just like I didn't know that you could do that. I didn't know you could post images. I didn't know that you could do all kinds of things. And but yeah, but then all these experts came to me and they just wanted my knowledge of comic books, and in exchange, they gave me all this knowledge of how to sell things online. And that's
Yeah.
basically why my channel came about, is because I posted like a handful of videos that and then I learned a whole bunch after that of
Yeah.
like, oh, this can be taken seriously.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that people actually value what I do as a skill. So I'll
What's
just
funny, sorry, I
sorry,
was gonna say
go
it's
ahead.
funny that you mentioned that like YouTube is like social media. We do have a YouTube channel as well, also ASAP Imagination.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. That was the one we
that's
were
the same,
missing.
yeah, yeah. It's just like I'm missing something, but yeah, and like the same thing. And we have like a showcase where we highlight our creators, and I was doing like a drawing show for a while, and now we're like switching that up, and then we have some like review shows. So like just you just like put stuff out there and kind of hope something sticks. And like it is tricky because like of course there's so much you can do. And obviously the more you can do, the better chance you have of something sticking. But like ultimately, like it's mostly just Hades and I. Like we do have like our group of people and people who post things, and like for a Kickstarter, like the people in like the NE1 World or people we work with, they're like, hey, go check out ASAP. Um, so yeah, like we have like people checking, like obviously helping us as well and like using their network. But in the end, it's just like you're only so many people. You only have so many hours in the day, and like I also mom full time, and like and I know lots of people in comics like have typically have like their main job because comics takes a while to
Yeah,
become
I'm the
lucrative if it
same.
ever does for people. So it is like it's a lot. So like you have to, there's only so many hours in a day and so much capacity. So you do what you can and like you try and like focus where it makes the most sense. Of course there's like infinite other things we could be doing, but we're growing. Like we're 3.5 years old. And we're still figuring things out and finding new things and trying to think outside the box and
Yeah,
find a way to stand out, right?
congrats on doing all everything you've accomplished within such a short period of time. To me, 3.5 years is nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
For
yeah. It's
especially
one
for
of
a
those
business
things.
with so many, with literally almost, if not over 100 IP under the name.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where it's like it's gone really fast, but it also has gone very slow. Like it's kind of like the somehow it's gone slow at
Yeah,
the same
I
time. Like
I
it's
100% get that too. Because
yeah, like
whenever
it's hard to
you're,
believe it's only been 3.5 years, but it's also hard to believe it's already been 3.5 years.
yeah, exactly. It still feels new, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, unless you got anything else, I guess. What is the? I'll put everything in the descriptions, but what is like the main three websites for people to follow you, ASAP, and anyone?
So asapimagination.com has most things. And like all the
Okay.
websites lead to each other, including
Okay,
my own.
gotcha.
NE1World.com is all the IP or like creator owned stuff.
And anyone is literally the letter N,
Yeah,
the number
NE,
one.
the number one.
Okay.
And then I have my own website, which is lacunningham.com. And then like ASAP and I both have link trees. So like if you find us somewhere, you'll find a link tree and then you can find us everywhere else.
Okay,
Like I said, I play
perfect.
hard
If
to
you
get.
send me
So
your link tree, I'll put that in the YouTube description, and
okay, cool. Yeah,
we'll
and
just.
then of course, like right now it has our Kickstarter in it, and people can search the complete points of Villainy on there, and
Perfect. And
Go
what
support us
when's
and
the
back us.
Kickstarter end? I'll try to make sure I get it
It's
up.
for the whole month of April, so April 1st, April 30th.
Okay, we got time.
So yeah, not sure exactly when this comes out, but yeah, like it's been funded, so we're going after the stretch goals, and obviously we want to get the book in as many people's hands as possible, and
And
horror fans
what is
and
it that's
comic
live?
fans.
What's the Kickstarter right now? Is it the anthology you were talking about, or what did I miss? What's live right now?
So it's the graphic novel of the original anthology. So the anthology was
Okay,
the 16 stories around this one event. And the graphic novel is the first graphic novel in what's going to be like the duology. So it's the complete points of villainy, and eventually we'll have the complete points of virtue, and those two will go together. So this one is 6 stories because we took 12 stories from the original anthology and had them illustrated. So it's 6 stories of regular people going through this paranormal catastrophic event in an alternate London. And then we have like 6 artists that work on each one's on the different stories. So people can check it out. We got trading cards and we got art, and you get drawn
awesome.
into a panel, and we got pendants coming. So it's all
All
kinds of
right,
stuff that hopefully appeal to be some people.
we'll send the Indie Comic Empire squad there.
Yeah, yeah. Go forth and do your duty.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on, and you take care in Canada. Where in Canada are you?
I'm in Calgary. And if anyone is watching in your network who's in Calgary, I'm going to be at the Calgary Fan Expo on
Okay,
April
yeah,
25th to 28th.
I know people in Toronto that watch this, and there's people in Quebec that watch this.
Yeah, they're probably not unless they happen to be here. Those aren't exactly close to each other,
Okay, yeah,
but
no, yeah.
maybe. Like there's like Todd McFarlane, or is Todd McFarlane coming now? I don't know. Someone recently canceled. Actually, I think it was Todd King. But I think Todd McFarlane is going to be here. I know like he's a big draw for comic fans and stuff. So there's reasons to make a trip out, but obviously it's not
Yeah,
close to
and for
all of the
those
places.
that
Canada's
are
big.
like me in the Midwest, it's actually faster to get to Toronto than it is to get to New York from like where I'm at in the Midwest in St.
Yeah,
Louis, which was to me
yeah.
kind of mind blowing. I didn't realize it was like, oh yeah, there's parts of Canada that are easier to get to or like closer than places on the East Coast from where we're at. So it was like just
Yeah.
Toronto, guys. You don't
Well,
need
and
to.
that's like, so for me, so like flying from here to Houston, which is like the whole north to south of the states, is like 5 hours, and flying like here to Toronto, which is like the whole east to, not even the whole east to west of Canada, is 5 hours.
Well,
So
yeah, that's wild. That it's like that far horizontally or whatever you call
that's
that.
what I mean. It's just not like you're not just like waking up in Toronto on like one morning and being like, I'm gonna go to the Calgary Expo.
No, yeah, it's
Like
like you
maybe there's
said,
like a quick
it's
flight and a cheap flight out, but
dang, we forget about that. That it's just like, yeah, it's a big place, guys.
yeah, it's funny because Hades in the UK, like it's small, and he's just like every con I feel like is like a 3 hour train ride away from him. Just like
Yeah,
you
that's
jerk.
true. That's
It's so
true.
easy for
That
you to
it
go to
is
like all the
totally
big city
different.
cons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly the opposite. It's like you think, oh, Canada way far away, or like the U.S., it's like California and the East Coast, it's like totally far away. But then whenever you're in Europe, it's like you can visit 6 different countries all within 3 hours of
Yeah,
each other.
yeah. Like for me, it's a 3 hour drive to the closest con, other than Calgary, obviously, where I live. But like for him, it's just like I think it's a 3 hour drive for like his furthest con.
Dang,
So
that is why I like being in the Midwest. Is that every state around me has a con, and every city around me has a con, and there's like within 5 hour driving distance, there's something. There's either Kansas City, Missouri, there's north, I can go up to either Chicago, Illinois, or Michigan or Minneapolis. If I go to Indiana or Tennessee or Kentucky, they all have their own. So it's like you can make
yeah,
your own inner loop of like a Midwestern tour without ever having to get on a plane and trying to carry your books on a plane. You can always just put them in the back of your truck or your car or whatever. Um,
yeah,
and that's what I try to explain to people about cons is like if you really want to sell books, you have to come up with some kind of tour.
yeah.
And just to make it easy, if you're in the Midwest, it's like there you can almost do it. But like you were saying, there's certain months of the year where just everything happens on the same day. Like literally the same weekend is when the
Yeah.
same three main cons happen. So you have to choose between, one of those. And it's just like, and then you'll go 2 months where nothing's happening. So it does, unfortunately, it's like you have to choose wisely. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah, for
don't want to
sure.
go too far over. I know I'm
Fair.
holding you up. So thanks a lot. I'll send everybody the Kickstarter and to ASAP Imagination and all the link trees and stuff like that. And till next time.
All right, thanks.